My name is James Lee, and originally from Flint, Michigan. Well, I've always been interested in art. It was probably in my teens when I was in the mall and I saw artists painting portraits, drawing portraits with pastel, and I was just kind of fascinated. You know, I would stop and look over their shoulder and just amazed at what they could do with what looked like a box of just chalks, you know, or chalk. And later found out it was pastel, and just seeing how they could pull all of that together in a very short time and have a likeness of someone. Through high school, I didn't have an art teacher, but my art teacher, or one of the art teachers, allowed me to come in, and I would wait around for basketball practice. So I would go into the art room and work on drawings and pastel paintings while I was waiting on practice. And so that's where I kind of developed more focus on it, and just amazed at what could happen. Just seeing things kind of, you know, start to have a resemblance to what I was trying to copy. You know, I was moved originally with the situation with Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, being a runner and seeing what happened to him. I was quite disturbed, and my son was actually living in Georgia, in Atlanta at the time. He's a runner, and just, you know, trying to process what happened with that, and then subsequent things that happened in a very short period of time. Began with the runner because I felt a connection to that. And you know, knowing that runners, if you're a serious runner, you don't just run in your neighborhood. You know, you run miles, you run all over the place. To think that someone could be so vulnerable in a place where they're just out, you know, for a run, and that could happen to them, just kind of made me feel, you know, that it was just no words for it. You know, you're trying to grapple with what you just saw or what you were experiencing. That on top of some of the other things that happened in the short order, just said, you know, I need to think about this a little bit. I need a way to try to resolve this in my mind. And in doing so, I started to sketch out some things, and it just kind of came together in a way. I didn't have to work really hard, and the ideas and the thoughts just kind of came, and it says, you know, these events are part of something much bigger than a current event. There's a historical basis. There's a historical context to these things. And I remember 5 years prior to that, 4 or 5 years prior, we were talking about Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Philando Castile. And we were like, man, here we are again. And so I said, you know, this time, let me think about this a little bit differently, so that I can hopefully have some input, you know, in another way, to keep it from happening. In that place too, you know, when I say historical connections, like when you think about it, it was in Georgia where Booker T. Washington gave the Atlanta Exposition Address. I think it was like 1895, somewhere around there. And in that speech, you know, it was a very prominent speech where he talked about segregation and how the nation could be together. You know, there's one line in that whole speech where it says, a nation, you can be together like a fist versus, and I'm paraphrasing, versus, you know, separate as the fingers on all things of mutual progress. You can be together as the fist, but on all things purely social is what he said. We can be separate as the fingers. So I should be real clear on how I'm saying that, I'm quoting. But he kind of sanctioned, you know, segregation. And I think about that time, and I think about how Ahmaud Arbery was seen as an outsider in that neighborhood. Why was he seen as an outsider? You know, that tells me a little bit more about that neighborhood, you know, if that can happen to you there. And so I thought about the proximity to where maybe Booker T. Washington gave that speech, and a century later, this is happening as a result of that kind of thinking, you know, because running is a social event. You know, he's not living in that neighborhood, but you're going to have people mingling in social settings. And that's where I think it became a threat, you know, to that community. What I learned in creating this, you know, prior to this piece of artwork, I pretty much focused on portraits, individual portraits, life drawing, those types of things. So this is my first compositional piece, where you're pulling together different ideas and seeing how they relate to one another. So almost like a quilter pulling together different pieces to kind of show something. I'm looking at also the value of our being able to use symbols to say things rather than just words all the time. You know, sometimes it helps you to get things all down almost on one surface and say, now let's talk about it. When you use words, you have to go and, you know, all over the place sometimes to get an idea across. But painting, it pulls a lot of things together, it has the potential to pull a whole lot of things together. Now we can talk about it, but we can kind of stay on topic because we have something to point to. We have something we can all kind of come together on to look at. But when we talk, we can get in tangents and we go off and we start, you know, sometimes dealing with the core of what we were there to kind of talk about. So I kind of like it. It kind of taught me that, you know, because when I first started, my wife looked at it and she said, "What are you doing?" Because she saw me sketching out on the canvas, you know. It's like, what on earth is that going to be, you know? But I had a feeling while I was doing it, I said, no, I could kind of see how things would flow. And again, for me, everything, I didn't have it like 100% done in terms of my sketch, but I had enough of it where I could see how one piece related to the next. And then I said, now I'll start to build and kind of go from there and add the paint, you know, to it. So it taught me about process, taught me about how you can pull your thoughts and feelings together and express yourself, you know, through paint or in a painting. I'm inspired, I would say, primarily by my elders and the people that came before us, that with their stories and the things that they've lived through and been through. From the time I was a teenager, I would go and sit on the porch of one of my elderly neighbors, and one of the neighbors that you can't walk past her house because she wants you to come by and pick something up from the store for her on your way. And so, but just sitting on her porch and learning history from her, even though it wasn't a history lesson, just by what she was saying, it was history if you were listening to her. She would tell me about Idlewild. She would tell me, you know, little things like, you know, boy, go in the house and icebox and get me such and such. Icebox, you know, what is that, you know? So you learn just by being around elderly people sometimes, you know, and you learn from their wisdom and their stories. And so, you know, that's kind of how I was brought up, to kind of appreciate that. And so that's what inspires me, just knowing that we are here, that we're resilient people, in spite of all of the things, you know, that we've been through. We're here, and we have a rich, wonderful history and culture to sustain us. So for me, it's a very vital institution by itself and in connection with African American museums around the country. I say that because this painting couldn't exist without my exposure to certain information that I got from museums. When I go to Mississippi, where I have some family, I go through Jackson, and there's a museum there called the Smith Robertson Museum. And that's where I learned about, you know, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments to the Constitution, because they had an exhibit on it. They were showing some of the first African Americans in Congress, and they were talking about voting rights and all of those things. They had beautiful quilts on the wall and paintings. They had one of my most favorite sculptures in the world, showing a woman who's on the auction block, an elderly woman who's, you know, being sold. And every time I go back through there, I want to stop at that museum. And so I think of a museum, even though it's local, it can be a destination place for people to go to, or when they're going to a city, that reflects that these people exist here. They have a culture here. They exist here, right? Their lives matter, however you interpret that. So when I go to other states, you know, I went to go to Chicago in the DuSable, you know, museum. I learned things there, seen beautiful artwork there. When I've gone to Dayton, Ohio, I happened to be there one day, and Cleveland, Ohio. There's a museum there, and I saw a lady from Mali creating mud cloth. Just happened to be there that day, videotaped it, you know. So I had learned about African textiles and how that relates to, you know, how African American quilting tradition comes from, you know, and is related to African textiles. And I just watched her do what she was doing. It's like, wow, look at what you can even stumble upon, you know. So they're vital individually and as a network. if we make them a part of our lives and if they're there, so that we can continue to learn. They nurture us, they educate us, and the whole community. So I think they're very vital, and I'm glad to be a supporter and to be a part of it. So I would say be true to yourself and your values, and when you learn, whether it is anything creative allows you to express yourself in another way. I chose to do this painting based upon some deep feelings and thoughts about what I saw going on. We have to be, as human beings, I think, be able to have an outlet, a way to express ourselves. And as I felt, words alone don't always seem sufficient. And so I think the creative aspect of art allows those of us who like visual arts or like sculpture or whatever, it allows us to express ourselves in those ways. That not instead of words, I guess, but sometimes in conjunction with words, whether it's with poetry, whether it's with music. Usually, it is in combination to kind of make a much bigger, fuller statement. But I appreciate the visual aspect, and I say be true to yourself and your values. Very grateful to be and honored to be a part of an exhibit with such distinguished artists. I'm not known as an artist. I'm known as a dentist in the community here in Ann Arbor, but it's one of the things that I'm passionate about, and I'm just glad to be included as a part of this effort.